Okay, so this is the video for topic 5.4 and 5.5, the phases of the Industrial Revolution. And in these two topics, we're combining, first off, how the Industrial Revolution spread across the world. And then in the second, 5.5, how did the modes, meaning the process, and the location of production of manufactured goods changed. So, in this topic, there's actually two essential questions you need to learn. One focuses on how the Industrial Revolution spreads and how did this spread change the mode and also change the locations of production between 1750 and 1900. Secondly, we also have a specific focus on technology and how it changed economic production from 1200 to 1900, focusing on this industrial period. So, when we look at the tasks that would help us answer this question, the very first thing is we have to identify the characteristics that define each phase of the Industrial Revolution. So, what we're arguing here is we're arguing that as the Industrial Revolution spread and adopted new technology, we enter a new phase. Secondly, we're going to describe each phase using those characteristics above. And then we're going to look at the big picture and we're going to say, okay, because of the spread of the Industrial Revolution, there were changes in the modes using technology, but also the locations of production. So pay attention to the verbs here. First one, we're just identifying, which is like a list. Second, we're describing, listing characteristics. But in the third, we're not only explaining how, but we're also included why the spread of technology changed the production and changed the locations of production. So when we look at this topic, this is basically our claim, our thesis, our main idea. Although the Industrial Revolution began in Britain, it soon spread to the Western world after 1815 and to other areas of the world after 1850. As the Industrial Revolution spread, the use of new resources and technology changed the modes and locations of manufacture. So, when we look at kind of a summary, this is a preview. This is what you're going to be learning throughout this topic. Number one, we always begin with the British phase. And this is going to focus on not only textiles, but using coal and steam powers to produce them, in addition to adding iron. During the second phase of industrialization, areas in the West are going to adopt an industrial economy, still using coal power, but now they're going to be driven by the concept of economic nationalism. So that's definitely something you're going to have to be able to define. The continued technological development led to the second industrial revolution, in which new sources of power and new technologies developed. This led to a demand for resources that the industrialized nations did not have. So now we're beginning to integrate that second question: how did technology kind of influence production? And that brings us to the global phase. In 1850, industrialism spreads to areas such as Egypt, Russia, and Japan because they were the only Asian states that had organized the factors of production using state sponsored industrialization. Now, I know that Egypt is part of Africa and not Asia, but remember they're controlled by the Ottoman Empire, and that is an Asian land empire. So what we're saying here is that we have new areas that are industrializing using the ideas of the second industrial revolution, but we've got a change in this thing called state sponsored industrialization. You're going to need to know that. And then finally, when we draw out and look at the big picture, we're establishing that this process through phases changed the role of many Asian states in the world economy. Some were replaced, others assumed new roles. So when we analyze those things that we're looking at to be able to evaluate each stage, the characteristics, The very first thing that we're going to look at through these phases was where and when. So dates are going to be important here. Secondly, what are the key industries? We know that it always begins in textiles, but also England has just about the best technology. England has the best output. So there's going to be some new industries that are going to see industrialization, specifically so you don't have to compete with the English. We're going to see the adoption of new sources of power and some key technological developments. So, what I'm telling you is that in every phase that you hear about, know where and when, the key industries, the sources of powers, and the key technology. So, when we kind of look at the big picture, we obviously begin with the British phase, focusing on textiles production throughout England using steam power and eventually going to be developing iron power. We have the Western phase, driven by economic nationalism, that takes place in Western Europe and the United States. And this is when we see new instruments of transportation, being the railroads and the steamship. And then, because of the Second Industrial Revolution and the growth of state sponsored industrialization, we are ushered into the global phase where Japan, the Ottoman Empire, Egypt, and Russia all industrialize because they basically have the right combination of the factors of production.